Well, the GOP largely split on how to take on Obamacare. Is Cruz's approach the way to go? Let's debate this. Mercedes Schlapp, she's a former media spokesperson for President George W. Bush, and David Mercer, former deputy finance director for the DNC. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Heather.
Pleasure to be here.
So Senator Cruz would need 41 senators or 218 representatives to get behind his legislation. So, Mercedes, I'll begin with you. What do you think about his tactic?
Well, I think Senator Cruz's heart is in the right place. However, I think his tactic, quite frankly, won't work politically. We know that there's a public support out there to basically oppose or disapprove of Obamacare. I think that in essence of trying to shut down the government, when you're not including Obama or when you're defunding Obamacare, I think that's when you have a big problem because there's not that public support for shutting down the government. At the end, I think the House leadership's approach where, basically they're talking about different options, but the fact that they're causing the slow death of Obamacare is, I think, a much more effective tactic than going forth with how Senator Cruz is approaching it. They just don't have the votes, and obviously Senator Reid is not going to move that forward.
And David, as Mercedes just alluded to, the House plan, Speaker Boehner is talking about delaying this debate until they have to take on the debt limit, and that will be, late October, early November strategy. And do both sides risk alienating Americans who are tired of the partisan bickering?
Well, I think they're alienating Americans and out of touch with Americans in general, as we see the polls with regard to the Republican leadership and in Congress at 10% favorability. So this kind of stunt that Cruz is suggesting in shutting down the government is, according to Senator Burr out of North Carolina, the dumbest idea he's ever heard of. And I think there are other Republican senators that think the same way. You have Senator Corker calling it a silly idea. Jonah Goldberg, a commentator on Fox News, called it a ludicrous strategy for legislation. The American people want to move on. Obamacare has been passed. It has been supported by the Supreme Court, signed by the president. It's time to move on and get some action out of Congress, and it's not in shutting down the government or in defunding what is the law of the land, being Obamacare.
But, David, I don't know if that's entirely true that Americans do want to move on, though, because in all of the latest polls, really an average of 2-to-1 margin, Americans say that Congress should keep working on the law. There are a couple reasons for that. The Americans think that the new health care law is going to increase their medical costs and their taxes and add to the federal deficit. And as we've seen over the past couple weeks, as more information starts to come out from larger companies, from universities, it really is increasing their costs. As a result, they're dropping coverage for spouses. We heard that last week. Mercedes?
That's right. I mean, the ones that are out of touch are the Democrats and President Obama. The reason being is you have 54% of Americans that disapprove of Obamacare. And the fact is that we need to see changes to the laws and the delays. I mean, even the president and the unions, his own liberal base is saying that there needs to be changes to the law. We've seen the delay in the employer mandates, and we also now need to move forward and have these delays. They need to have the delays on the individual mandates, which, by the way, has bipartisan support in the House, as well as on the exchange subsidies and the taxes. And let me tell you, those vulnerable Democrats, take that into 2014 during the midterm elections. There will be a referendum on Obamacare. And if we are able to delay this, at that point, the Republicans have a good chance of regaining the Senate and keeping the House, and in essence, maybe seeing more of this change that we need in Obamacare.
And David, I'm going to let you comment on that. But before we begin with that, I also want to touch on the 2014 midterm elections. And I want to listen to the sound that came in from Senator Scott Brown on Fox News Sunday. Listen to this.
Whether they shut down the government, I think that's exactly what Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer want, and that's what the Democrats want in the House, because that'll just show, oh, here we go again, the Republicans holding everything up.
All right, David, effect on 2014 midterms.
Well, I think he's right. The Senator Scott Brown is right that if they do shut down the government, you can ask Newt Gingrich what trouble that'll bring upon Republicans. We're not calling for a shutdown. You only hear that coming off the lips of Republicans. But going also to Mercedes' point, I think as you hear more news, as we saw recently in mid-July with New York finally getting its exchange up and running, and with rates being posted, that they're expecting a 50% reduction in the cost of insurance.
That's not the same everywhere. That's not equal across all states.
Well, you're right. It's not the same everywhere, especially where Republican governors are dragging their feet on creating exchanges to get transparency on competitive rates that will lower rates overall. So it's about time the GOP governors started to set up those exchanges so you can have transparency, competition in the marketplace to get those rates down.
Mercedes, last word.
That's what we think should happen.
Okay.
Well,
Mercedes?
again, I think the Republicans need to come together and be united here, because at the end, what we do need to see is a delay in Obamacare, and at the end, it puts these vulnerable Democrats in a very tricky position. So again, I think pushing it forward to the 2014
why delay benefits
elections,
like
delay benefits? This is
6.3
delaying
million
the
elderly and
individual.
disabled
This is about
individuals
delaying
who have seen a
individual mandates.
$6.1 billion reduction
Why
in their
just
drug
delay
costs?
for
Why would
employers
we
and
get
not
rid of
delay
that?
for
Why get
individuals
rid
and
of that?
To
families?
wrap it up, we appreciate you both joining us, and I think that we need to continue this on another day. That was
Yes,
good
that
stuff
would
from
be
both
fun.
of you.
Look
Thank
forward to
you.
it.
Thank you.
Some new questions about